Hey guys, and welcome back to Nico Dev. Today we will make a tutorial and talk about Cloud Functions. Cloud Function is basically a backend for Firebase that will let you deploy JavaScript code onto Firebase and then run it whenever you want. Now we're gonna divide this video in three different parts, which are basically three different kinds of functions. The first function is going to be a function you can call by just going to a certain URL, so it's just going to be an endpoint. The second function instead is going to be a function that is getting triggered when you change some data on the database. So as soon as you change some data at a specific spot, that function will get triggered. And then the third function is going to be a scheduled function, so a function that runs, let's say, every hour, or every minute, or every day, or every Tuesday. With that said, we can begin. But before beginning, have you left a like yet on the video or subscribed if you're new? Really, if you do any of those things, you would support the channel so much, and also leave in the comments any ideas you want for the future. Keep in mind, this video that I'm doing right here, was suggested by a few of you guys, and this is why I'm making it. So, it's important for me to know what content you want to see next. And on that note, my next video will probably be something about a multiplayer system in Firebase, because so many people are stuck on this and really want to make something fun and multiplayer using Firebase Realtime Database, so this is something we will look into for the next video. Alright, so let's begin. Okay, so this is my file manager and I created a folder which is Cloud Functions Tutorial. We can open a terminal inside of here, and here we can initialize our Firebase. Now, in order to do this, I already said in another video, you actually need the Firebase command. And you can download that using npm by doing, I believe, npm install Firebase tools. Something like that. But if this is not the exact command, I'm going to leave a link in the description for you to check out. Okay, but if we do Firebase init, we are going to initiate an instance of Firebase, and it's going to ask us what we want to put into this. Now, if you watched my latest video on Firebase emulators, you can remember we actually used this to set up emulators. But today we only care about functions, so we're gonna trigger this on by clicking space, or pressing space, and then doing enter. Then we can select either an existing project or a new project. This is gonna go through your Firebase projects. I'm just going to use a test one for this one. And then it will tell us which language to use. When I told you that this was a backend in JavaScript, I kinda lied, because you can also do it in Typescript. But Typescript is actually pretty close to JavaScript. It's just an improved version that you can also use. But for simplicity, I'm going to stick to JavaScript, and then I'm going to do yes, because this is helpful, and also I'm going to install the dependency, and this is not going to take long, but I will skip it. There you go, and now we are done. We can start writing anything we want. We can start writing any function we want with just that command. Alright, so if we go back to our folder, you can see that we have this stuff right here. Alright, what you actually need to do is just go in the functions folder, and as you can see right here, you have everything you need. What you actually need to modify is this index.javascript file. So we can open this with Visual Studio Code. This is the place where your Cloud Functions will stay. Now, as you can see, we already have a default Cloud Functions, and we're gonna use that in just a moment. Let me just uncomment it, okay, and just do this. Now, you don't need to know what any of this code does, even if it's pretty straightforward, but since it's just default code, I'm going to just uncomment it and now save the file. Now, this function is currently in my index.javascript, but it's local. If I want to deploy this change, I have to go back to my terminal, which, if you remember, is in my Cloud Functions tutorial, and for initiating everything I did Firebase init, but now I just need to do Firebase deploy. And this is going to deploy my functions, as well as anything else that I have set up in this folder, like database rules, or hosting websites, but naturally, we only set up functions because this tutorial is mainly on functions, so, it's going to deploy the functions. This is not going to take long. As you can see, it's going to be creating a new node for functions. And as you can see, it created this new function, which is our hello world function, which is this one right here. Now, as soon as it finishes deploying this, if this deployed correctly, it will give us actually a link where we can call this function. So this function is basically an endpoint, so this is the first type of function. It doesn't really matter right now. We're going to describe later the three different kind of functions I'm going to show in this tutorial, but right now we're just deploying a test function just to show you that it works. Come on, Firebase, don't leave me hanging like this. This is nerve-wracking. Come on. It usually doesn't take this long, I swear. Okay, there you go, it's done. And now we have this link right here, okay, that we can open thanks to our terminal. And as you can see, if we go to this link, this is actually a web page, okay, that you can go, you can test this out. And if you go to this link, you will get this response, which is hello from Firebase. And if we go back to our function, as you can see, this is basically exactly what it does. It sets up a new function, which is the hello world function, and it's a function which is type on request, and it's going to send us a response, which is hello from Firebase, which is this string of text right here. So there you go, our first function was correctly set up. And we also know now how to call these functions. Naturally, if you need to call this function from any place or from any app, you can just do a get request to this URL and you're going to get the result. Now, as example, I can try doing it via terminal. I can do curl and then just this, and I'm going to get back hello from Firebase. I know there is also a Firebase Functions SDK for some services, such as Unity, that allows you to call functions more easily. But you know, it's as easy as doing a request to this website. So I don't know what additional functionalities the SDK adds, but we're not gonna show that in this tutorial. Okay, so we already got a little bit of a spoiler on what the first type of function is. Now, as you can see, this function has two parameters, a request and a response. And now, as a test, I'm going to change this function, or maybe I will keep this function, okay? This function can stay, okay? This function is pretty fun. We're gonna actually copy it and create a different function. I'm gonna call this function string to length, okay? I'm really good at giving names to functions. This is a function I will always remember. Oh, actually, let's call it text to length, okay? Much better. Alright, so as you can see, as a parameter of this function, we have the request and the response. Basically, the request will give us any information that the client has given us during the request. So, for example, if it's a post request, from the request we can get actually the body. So if I go right here and do request dot, you can see that I can get a lot of stuff. So I can get the body of the request, I can get the state of the request, I can get the URL of the request. Not sure why that would be a thing that I want. I can get the headers of the request, which is something that I might also need, and we're gonna use them right now. I can also get the queries of the request. Basically, what I want to do is I'm going to give this function a string, okay? And this function will return me the length of the string. Pretty straightforward. We already know from this example how to make the function return something, which is response.send, and then whatever we want to send, okay? Okay, but first of all, from the request, we have to actually retrieve the original text that we want to know the length of. So we're gonna go var text equal request.query, and now basically this query is a dictionary string. So right here we could input anything we want, like an example text, and this is basically going to be the name of the query, and we're gonna get the value of this query if it's not null. So the text is going to be this, and then we're gonna do a new variable which is text length, which is basically just going to be text.length. Pretty straightforward. And then we're gonna do response.send text length. Alright, so we save and then we go back to our terminal and deploy the function again. One thing to keep in mind is that now we have both of the functions deployed, because as you can see, whoops, that's my OBS, I didn't want to show that, but as you can see, the index.javascript has both of the functions. If I were to remove this function and then hit save, it would actually remove the function from the Cloud Functions once I hit deploy. Alright, so now that our function was correctly deployed and this is the URL, by the way, the URL is always the same for your project. The only part that changes is this slash, and right here this is the name of the function. So the name of our previous function was hello world. The name of this function is going to be text to length, so I can just do text to length, and as you can see, it will return me an error. Haha, I see what the problem is. So right here, response.send only accepts a string, but beforehand I was actually passing an integer because the text length is an integer, so it didn't understand what I was sending, and it thought I was sending an error code. So that is why it was giving me this problem. But anyway, lesson learned. So I just need to, I can just concatenate this string like this, so it will parse this as a string. I already deployed the new version, but it is actually really good that I made this mistake, because now if you go to functions right here, you click on functions in your project, you can actually see a dashboard of all of the functions that we published, and you can also see the logs where it's going to tell you the various exceptions that happened either while deploying but also when running the function. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of different errors from me trying the function a bunch of times, and as you can see, it will give me range error, invalid status code 4. Because I gave this function a text, which was test, the length of test is 4, and right here I was sending 4, and it considered 4 as an error code, and it was an invalid error code, so it gave me this exception. You can also see that if I don't input anything as a query, I will still get an error, and if I go to the console, I will get this error, which is cannot read property length of undefined, because naturally I didn't insert any queries. But if right here I do text equal, at example, test1234, I'm going to get 8, because the length of test1234 is 8. So great, the function is running correctly. Now probably one thing you could do is do a check if this query is undefined or not, and if it is, just return error, because right now we're not doing any check for exceptions, so it's just dying horribly. But other than that, this function is done. Alright, great, so now we know how to properly set up a function with a URL endpoint. Alright, so now we're going to learn how to extend Cloud Functions into our Firebase Realtime Database, aka we're going to create a function that is going to get run automatically when something on the database changes. I will leave in the description this page, which is the docs page, which will teach you how to exactly do that and give you information on the code itself. Okay, so this is the formatting for our new function. As you can see, it's the same for our old ones, but instead of being functions.https on request, it's going to be functions.database.ref. And this basically means this function will be called when this kind of path changes. And now we can put any path we want right here, and it's going to be a path to our database. So if we go back to our database itself, let's remove this thing, and let's add maybe a user folder, okay? And right here we can add, we're just gonna add one user as a test. This is gonna be user 1. Maybe it's going to have a name, a surname, and a nickname, okay? And okay, this could be ABC. Now I want to test for when a user has changed his name. So we're gonna go right here, we're gonna do a new node detected, functions.database.ref. We have to go first in users, and I don't need the quotes, okay, because there are already the single quotation marks. Okay, then I have to go to user 1, okay. Now there is one small problem, okay. I don't want to know if user 1 has changed his name, but what I want to know is if any user has changed their name. So for example, I could have a user 2 that just updated his name to, I don't know, sad, okay, that's the first, or maybe something happier, okay, maybe ABC. So right here in the path, instead of putting user 1, I could just put, using this format right here, I could put a generic user ID, and what this basically means is it will check for any user that changed his name. So as you can see in the docs, we actually have all 4 of the methods explained, and you can use these for any shenanigans that you want. So the onCreate method will trigger when, some data is created, so the data at that location was null, and now it's something. Instead, onDelete will do the opposite, so when the data goes back to null, then it will trigger. OnUpdate instead will trigger only when the data changed from something to something. And instead, onWrite will be triggered always, so either the data changed to null, changed from null, or changed from something. OnWrite doesn't care, it will just always trigger. Now for our initial condition, we're going to use onCreate, which means that the function will trigger only when the user adds his name to the database, but if he changes it later, it's not going to trigger. Alright, so now right here we have a snapshot as a parameter, and this snapshot is basically a data snapshot of this branch. So using this parameter, we can get information on the name branch and the name value. So by just doing snapshot.value, this is going to be the name of the user. So if I do var name equals this, and the user changes his name to ABC, this variable will be ABC. Okay, so for testing, I can just do console log name, and we're going to see the name in the logs on Firebase. Okay, also one thing to keep in mind, and which is actually pretty good, is that right here, when you're deploying, it will actually give you any warning or exceptions that don't make your code run. And right here at example, it gave me a warning that instead of using the coercion or whatever I was using right here for this function, what I could basically do is just do string this, and this will basically convert my number into a string. And Firebase actually suggested me this. Alright, but now we have actually deployed, so this function should be live, as you can see. Successful create operation right here, okay? And we created our new node detected function, which probably is not a good name for it. But now if I go right here, and now keep in mind, this function will only trigger when I create some data. So I'm going to create a user tree, okay? We're not going to set the name just yet. We're gonna just set the surname, at example, which is going to be B. And as you can see, nothing will trigger. But if on user tree I also add a name, which is test name, the function will actually run. And now to see that this function has run, I can go into the logs. There you go, my function has run, and it returned me test name, which is basically this console log thing. You can also see that there was an exception, and the reason for that is because we actually didn't return anything to the function. So it was giving an exception because the function returned undefined, but we actually don't care about that. All we care about is that we got the correct information, which is test name. Now one thing to note is that this data snapshot naturally, it doesn't have to be just one value, it could also contain children. So for example, you can do .child and you can get a specific children. But yeah, for this example, the value is just the name of the user, it's just a string. But it could be a more complex object that is on Firebase. But yeah, now that that is done, what if we want to get back the user ID that set this name? Keep in mind, right now we only have information about the name of the user, but we don't have information about what the user ID of that user is. So as you can see in the URL, I used this special form to indicate that, it could be any user ID will do. I could actually retrieve this specific user ID for the specific change when I run this function. And the way I do that is using this context parameter. So I could do a new variable which is user ID, and this one will just be context dot, and as you can see we can get a lot of information about when the request was made at example, but also the event type, so if it's a write event, if it's an update event or an onCreate event. But what we need right now is just the parameters dictionary, and in the parameters we can just put the user ID parameter, and this will give us back the user ID of the user, just with magic. So right now in the console log I could write, instead of just writing the name, I could say user ID changed its name to, there you go, I just need to add some spaces so it looks nice. Now before deploying, I actually want to do one last change. As of right now, we are using the function onCreate. So this means that this function will only be called when we create new data. So if a user changes his name, this function will actually not be called. And we don't want that. We actually want this function to always run. As soon as a user changes his name, this function has to run. So instead of onCreate, we are going to use onWrite. Now, onWrite and onUpdate actually have a tiny little bit of a change in the parameters of the function. Instead of being a snapshot and a context, right here, instead of the snapshot parameter, we're gonna have a change parameter. And basically, a change parameter basically contains two different snapshots. It contains the snapshot before an update was made, and the snapshot after an update was made. So we know how the data was before the user changed it, and how it is now after the user changed it. So right here, let's add another variable, which is, okay, let's rename this to previous name, okay, and this is going to be the, or we could call it old name, and it could just be change dot before dot value, and then we're going to have the new name, which is going to be change dot after dot value. Alright, so now right here we can say user ID changed its name from the old one to the new one. And now we're gonna know all of the information we need. We know who did this change, we know what was the name before, and this is probably gonna be null if the name was nothing before, so you probably have to do some checks on that. And then it's going to give us the new name of the user, so this is great. Alright, and now let's see if it works. We have test name right here on user 3, and we're going to update it to new name, maybe spelled correctly. And as you can see, we actually updated it, and if we go right here in the logs, in a while we will get the new logs that it will tell us exactly the information we want, hopefully. Now you might say it's taking a little bit of a while actually retrieving the logs, and this is normal, but the function is actually executing instantly. It just takes a while to get the logs. And there you go, as you can see the log is telling me user3 change this name from test name to new name. So this works. Now before going to our third type of function, which is basically a scheduled function, I want to show you just how instantly this update happens. In order to show you that, I actually want to push back some data on the database. So when the user changes his name, I want the function to post some data somewhere else on the database. And in order to do that, it's actually really simple. I can just use the admin SDK. In order to do that, right here I have to create a new constant called admin that will require the Firebase admin SDK. And now what this admin SDK does, especially on the database, because it actually can access different services such as Auth or even Firestore. Okay, in order to set it up, we just have to do this, which is basically going to initialize our admin app using the config which is already in the Firebase function. And then right here we can have a variable which is just going to be our database admin SDK, which is going to be admin.database. Okay, and down here, instead of doing console log, we can just do database.ref, and here put the place where we want to post the information into, which in my case, just making stuff up, can be metadata, okay, and then last changed name. And we're gonna put it right here, and then we're gonna do .set, and inside these parentheses we have to put the object that we want to set, which in our case it will be a string, and will be this string right here. Bam! Okay, so in theory, if I deploy now, it should work. Alright, and now if we do the exact test again, but we do it on user 2, and we call this CBA, it's going to create a new thing which is metadata, okay, and it's going to add last changed name, and as you can see the value will be user2 change this name from ABC and CBA. And you can see how fast this was. So as you can see, boom, and then 1, 2, in 2 seconds it just deployed this. So this is pretty fun. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to show you in this pretty long video, I just realized, is the scheduled functions. Okay, luckily for us, the syntax for doing scheduled functions is really simple. So right here we have our new function, and it's going to be a functions.pubsub, this time, .schedule. And right here you can input as a string how often you want your function to run. Now there is actually a syntax for pubsub, and I'm going to leave a link in the description to that syntax so you can check it out. But basically you can write every 60 seconds or every 60 minutes or even every day or every day at a certain time, I believe, and it will run the function exactly at that time every day. So in my case I want to make it run every 60 seconds, and just for testing, this function will run every 60 seconds, so every 60 seconds I want something to be updated on the database. I'm just going to do database.ref metadata last update, okay, an example, okay, it's a pretty stupid example, but okay, .set, and inside of here we can set some data. Now naturally if the data is always the same, we are not going to see it update, so it's not going to be particularly interesting. So right here I could just set the current time, okay, so I could do time.day, or wait, it's date time, I know JavaScript. Oh, it's date. Okay, an example, I can do var date equals new date, and this is basically going to give us the date for today. And I can do date dot get date. I think it's going to give me the timestamp, probably, hopefully. And this is probably a function, right? Yes. Oh no, this gets me the date of the month. Okay, so I don't want this. Get time is probably what I want. Yes. Get the time value in milliseconds. This is exactly what I want. And then, as you saw from this function, I'm actually gonna return a null, always, just so the logs don't get filled with exceptions. Okay, and I believe this is the last time I'm going to deploy. And now, before deploying, make sure that you have enabled billing on your project. Unfortunately, scheduled functions can only work if your project is upgraded to the pay-as-you-go or Blades plan. You can actually have up to 3 free scheduled functions, but in order to make it work, because it requires the service pub/sub, you need to have a billing account set up. So I'm going to transfer these functions on a project which is on the Blades Firebase plan. I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, I've done that, but one thing to note while the functions are deploying, in order to actually start using scheduled functions correctly, you have to go to your project settings, and then right here on your Google Cloud Platform Resource Locator location, you have to set a location. After you set it, you cannot change it later, but as long as it's pretty close to where you are going to, you're going to have most of your users, it's not going to be a problem. I actually tried out a bunch of different locations and I didn't have that much impact on performance, so it doesn't really matter what you choose, as long as you don't choose a database or a server which is in like Antarctica, but I don't see any of those here, so using any one of these two should be alright. In my case, I'm going to use the American one, and I'm gonna hit done. And now, after you did this operation, then you can deploy your functions without problems. But even if you forget to do this, it's just going to give you a log telling you to do this, so it's not a big deal. Alright, so lastly, here we are in the project which has the Blades plan enabled, as you can see, and it's also called the multiplayer experiment, which is also, we could say a spoiler to my next video, which I told you is going to be about this stuff. But now, in theory, if we wait 1 minute, this function should actually work. Hopefully. Positive. I'm not sure actually. We can actually go in functions, and as you can see, I have another function set up. Don't worry about this one. Doesn't seem like this one is working. The one we did ourselves, as you can see, is not working. The reason for that is that maybe I messed up the syntax of the function. I don't think you can actually use seconds. I think you can go up to minutes. So instead of doing every 60 seconds, I have to go every 1 minute, which is pretty strange, but I believe I have to do this. I thought I could use seconds, but I guess I can't. I guess calling a function every second would be way too overkill, so that's probably why they didn't allow that. Okay, and one last thing while it's deploying, if you actually go to your Google Cloud Platform in your project and you go to Cloud Functions, from here, you can actually call the functions yourself. So as you can see here, we have our 2 functions, the same that you saw on the Firebase website, and from here, we can actually test the function. So even if it's not time to call the function, with this button you can, call it remotely. I'm saying this just in case you're calling a function once every year, and then in order to test it, you're just patiently waiting for the year to pass. Well, you can just click this button, and it's gonna be much quicker. Alright, but now hopefully if we refresh this page, the scheduled function will work, because it's going to show us that it needs to execute. Yeah, it executes every minute. And if we go back to the database, probably already a minute has passed, so it probably already executed once. Yes, it did. So as you can see, I have the timestamp right here. Alright, so now we're just gonna, I'm just going to do the outro, and you're probably going to see this value update in just a moment. Okay, thank you ever so much for watching this video to the very end, and before leaving, I think you can actually enjoy more content on Firebase if you are interested. Also, I'm doing a series on machine learning. Right now it's kinda stuck because I'm working on this Firebase stuff. Oh, it just updated. Nice. But yeah, I'm working on this Firebase stuff that a lot of people are enjoying and are watching. But yeah, I will also be back with my series on machine learning soon. And with that, I hope you really enjoyed this video. It was really amazing to make. Leave a like if you did and if you learned something new. And I'm going to see you guys in the next one. See ya!